Who moved my cheese? But Ho was wondering why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner. As he started out into the maze, Hall looked back to where he had come from and felt his comfort. He could feel himself being down back into similar territory, even though he hadn't found cheese here for some time. Hall became more anxious and wondered if he really wanted to go out into the maze. He wrote a saying on the wall ahead of him and started at it for some time. What would you do if you weren't afraid? He thought about it. He knew sometimes some fear can be good. When you are afraid, things are going to get worse if you don't do something. It can prompt you into an action. And but it is not good when you are so afraid that it keeps you from doing anything. He looks to his right to the part of the maze where he had never been and felt the fear. Then he took a deep breath, ran right into the maze, and jogged slowly into the unknown. He tried to find his way, worried at first that he might have waited too long in cheese station C. He hadn't had any cheese for so long that he was now weak. It took him longer and it was more painful than usual to get through the maze. He decided that if he were ever got chance again, he would get out of his comfort zone and adopt to change sooner. It would make things easier than how a smile, a weak smile, as he thought, better late than never, better late than never. During the next several days, Howe found a little cheese here and there, but nothing that lasted very long. He had hoped to find enough cheese to take some back to him and encourage him to come out into the maze. But Howe didn't feel confident enough yet. He had to admit he found it confusing in the maze. Things seems to have changed since the last time he was out there. Just when he thought he was getting ahead, he would get lost in the corridor. It seems his progress was two steps forward and one step backward. It was a challenge, but he had to admit that being back in the maze hunting for cheese wasn't nearly as bad as he feared it might be. As time went on, he begins to wonder if it was realistic for him to expect to find new cheese. He wondered if he had bitten for more than he could chew. Then he laughed, realizing that he had nothing to chew on at that moment. Whenever he started to get discouraged, he reminded himself that what he was doing, as uncomfortable as it was at the moment, was in reality much better than staying in the cheeseless situation. He was taking control rather than simple letting things happen to him. Then he reminded himself if Steve and Scurry could move on, so could he. Later, as Hall looked back on things, he realized that cheese at cheese station C had not just disappeared overnight as he had once believed. The amount of cheese that had been there towards the end had been getting smaller, and that was left had grown old. It didn't taste as good. Mold may even have begun to grow on the cheese station. Although he hadn't noticed it, he had to admit, whoever, that if he had wanted to, he probably couldn't have seen what was coming, but he did it. Ho now realized that the change probably would not have taken him by surprise if he had been watching what was happening all along, and if he had anticipated change. Maybe that's what Sniff and Scurry had been doing. He decided he would stay more alert from now. He would expect change to change and look for it. He would trust his basics instinct to seem he would trust his basic instincts to sense when change was going to occur and he ready to adapt to it. He stopped for a rest and rode on the wall of the maze. Smell the cheese often so you know when it is getting old. Sometimes later, after not finding cheese for what seems like a long time, Hoff finally came across a huge cheese station which looked himself when he went inside. However, he was most disappointed to discover that the cheese station was empty. This empty feeling was happened to me too often. He thought he felt like giving up. He was losing his physical strength. He knew he was lost and was afraid he knew he would not survive. He thought about turning around and heading back to Chase Station C. At least if he made it back and him was still there, Ho wouldn't be alone. Then he asked himself the same question again. What would I do if I weren't afraid? Ho thought he was past his fear, but he was afraid more often than he liked to admit. Even to himself, he wasn't always sure what he was afraid of. But in his weakened condition, he knew now he was simply fearful of going on alone. Haw didn't know it, but he was running behind because he was still weighed down by fearful belief. Haw wondered if him had moved on or if he was still paralyzed by his own fear. Then Haw remembered the times when he had felt his best in the maze. It was when he was moving alone. It was when he was moving along. He wrote on the wall, knowing it was as much as a reminder to himself as it was a remarking for his friend Ham, hopefully to follow. Movement in a new direction help you find a new cheese. He looked down the dark passageway and was aware of his fear. What lay ahead, was it empty? Or worse, were there dangers lurking? He began to imagine all kinds of frightening things that could happen to him. He was scaring himself to death. Then he laughed at himself. He realized his fear was making things worse. So he did what he would do if he weren't afraid. He moved in a new direction. As he started running down the dark corridor, he begins to smile. Hall didn't realize it yet, but he was discovering what nourished his soul. He was letting go and trusting what lay ahead for him, even though he did not know exactly what it was. To his surprise, he started to enjoy himself more and more. What do I feel so good? He wondered. I don't have any cheese. I don't know where I am going. Before long, he knew why he felt good. He stopped to write again on the wall. When you stop being afraid, you feel good.